It was supposed to be a quiet Saturday morning, just me, a cup of coffee, and a little home improvement project I'd been putting off for weeks. The plan? Finally install a smart lock on the gate leading to my pool. Not exactly a wild activity. Right. But the moment I started unpacking the box and drilling into the fence post, things took a turn I never saw coming. I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, someone standing just outside the gate, arms crossed, glaring at me like I had just broken into Fort Knox. It was Karen's son. And not just any son, this guy's got the same entitled energy as his mom, but with an even nastier edge. Now, for context, Karen lives 2 houses down. She's been a thorn in everyone's side since the day she moved in, always complaining about dogs barking, trash bins being too close to the curb. And let's not forget, she's convinced the whole neighborhood must follow her version of the HOA rules, though she's not even on the board. But her son, he takes it up a notch. The guy doesn't even live here full-time, yet he acts like he owns the block, so there I am. On my own property, securing my pool gate for safety, and suddenly he starts yelling across the yard, demanding to know why I'm messing with the fence. I tell him, calm as ever, that I'm just installing a smart lock to keep the area secure, especially with kids around. But he doesn't want to hear it. Instead, he storms off, pulls out his phone, and calls 911 saying I'm tampering with private property and accusing me of being suspicious in my own backyard. Before I even had a chance to process what was happening, 2 squad cars pulled up. Lights flashing, officers stepping out. And here I was, standing there with a screwdriver in hand, while the guy who just trespassed into my yard played the victim. What happened next left even the officers speechless, and that's where things really started spiraling out of control. One of the officers walked toward me, hand resting near his belt, while the other went straight to Karen's son, who was now pacing dramatically on the sidewalk like he'd just caught a criminal. I stayed calm, didn't raise my voice, just kept my hands visible and explained everything. I told them I was installing a smart lock on my pool fence for safety. My pool, my fence, my property. I even showed them the receipt and the manual still sitting in the box next to my toolbox. The officer near me nodded, clearly starting to piece things together. But his partner seemed more focused on the loud accusations coming from across the yard. Karen's son kept going off, saying things like I looked suspicious, that I was up to something, and that I didn't have the right to make changes to the fence without HOA approval. Now that part caught me off guard. For one, this smart lock wasn't even visible from the street. And second, this guy doesn't live here full-time and isn't even on the HOA. So how does he think he can decide what I do with my pool gate? I could feel the tension rising, not just between him and me, but in the air itself. Neighbors started peeking out from their windows, and one even walked out with her phone, recording quietly from across the street. She'd had her own run-ins with Karen and her son, so I wasn't the only one who'd been targeted. The crazy part? The guy had actually stepped into my yard when he started yelling full-on trespassing. But now he was trying to flip the story. I was still trying to wrap my head around how a simple home upgrade led to this. When one of the officers suddenly asked me to step aside, that's when I realized this wasn't going to be a quick conversation. As I stepped to the side, like the officer asked, I couldn't help but glance back at Karen's son, who was now leaning against the fence like he owned the place. He had this smug look on his face, like he thought calling the cops had given him the upper hand. But what he didn't expect was that the officer who had spoken to me was already starting to question his version of events. That's when things got a little more twisted. Out of nowhere, Karen herself came marching down the sidewalk, holding a clipboard and wearing that same expression she always had when she was about to start trouble. She didn't even look at me, just walked right up to the officers and started talking fast, waving her hand around like she was running a town hall. She claimed the smart lock I was installing was against community guidelines and accused me of being a safety threat. Her words didn't even make sense, especially considering it was my pool and the lock was literally there to improve safety. But she wasn't trying to be reasonable. She was trying to build a case. Then came the twist I didn't see coming. Karen's son suddenly told the officer that he'd seen me tampering with the shared side of the fence, trying to spin this into some sort of vandalism issue. That's when I realized they weren't just trying to stop the smart lock, they were setting up something bigger. Maybe a bogus HOA violation, maybe an attempt to push me out of the neighborhood altogether. Either way, they were working together, and they were trying to make me look like the problem. While all this was happening, my neighbor Lisa, who's lived across the street for over a decade, started recording the entire interaction. She whispered that this wasn't the first time Karen and her son had pulled something like this, and that a few years back they tried a similar stunt with another family. But that case never made it this far. This time, though, they had the police involved, and things were about to get even more complicated. The officer speaking to Karen started asking pointed questions, real ones. Not the polite nod-along type. She stumbled a bit, trying to explain how my smart lock somehow violated HOA rules. Even though she couldn't name the exact policy, her son kept cutting in, throwing around buzzwords like community safety and unauthorized modifications. But every time he spoke, it felt more forced, more rehearsed. Meanwhile, the other officer circled back to me and quietly asked if I had any footage of the interaction. Thankfully, I had a motion-activated camera mounted right above the pool gate. I told him I could pull it up on my phone, and he nodded. Suddenly, a little more serious. Karen must have sensed the shift because her tone changed fast. She backed off the illegal modification story and started pushing the trespassing lie harder, saying I'd stepped into their yard to access the fence. That would have been hilarious if it wasn't so manipulative. Lisa, still recording, whispered that they'd done the same thing before, flipped the story, confused the facts, and hoped people gave up before digging deeper. But this time, I wasn't about to let that happen. Just when I thought things couldn't get more intense, another neighbor, Tom, came jogging over from a few houses down. He was out of breath, but angry. He'd heard the shouting and said he'd seen Karen's son walk through my side gate before the cops arrived. And not just that, but he'd taken photos of him standing inside my yard. Tom pulled out his phone to show the officer, and in that moment, I could see the cracks forming in Karen's perfect little plan. Karen's son noticed too, and he suddenly got defensive, raising his voice and insisting that he was the one being harassed. He claimed he had a right to inspect the gate because it bordered shared property. The officers looked at each other, clearly trying to keep things from escalating. But the tension was so thick, you could feel it. Neighbors were now gathering quietly on sidewalks. Phones were out. The story was unraveling, and something was about to snap. Just when I thought the situation couldn't spiral any further, one of the officers got a call on his radio. He stepped away briefly, and when he came back, his entire tone shifted. He asked if I could step aside with him for a moment. I followed, trying to stay calm, but my gut told me something was off. That's when he hit me with it. Karen's son had filed a complaint earlier that morning, claiming I had threatened him during a previous encounter. According to him, I'd intimidated him when he walked by my property the day before. That's right, he had preloaded a false accusation, just in case today didn't go his way. I was stunned. Not only was this guy trespassing and calling 911 on me for installing a smart lock on my own pool fence, now he was layering it with old lies to make it look like a pattern. I immediately told the officer I had outdoor cameras that had recorded everything from the past few days, including the supposed incident he was talking about. The officer seemed relieved to hear that and asked me to pull the footage, but in the back of my mind, I realized how calculated this whole thing was. This wasn't just about a smart lock anymore. Karen and her son had been building a paper trail, at least trying to paint me as the one who didn't belong, who was aggressive, who was a threat. They were twisting my every move into something suspicious. And the worst part, if I didn't have solid proof, things could have easily gone the other way. As I was loading the footage on my phone, Lisa gasped. She pointed across the street, where a man in a blazer was walking toward the crowd, clipboard in hand. She recognized him right away. He was from the HOA's legal committee. Apparently, Karen had gone behind everyone's back and submitted a formal complaint about me, complete with witnesses, fabricated statements, and a request to fine me for unauthorized construction. My jaw dropped. The moment the HOA legal rep stepped into my yard, clipboard in hand, Karen lit up like she'd just won a prize. She practically ran over to him, pointing at me and talking fast, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. She handed him some printed documents, probably the same complaint she'd tried to spin to the officers. Her son stood tall beside her, arms crossed like this was some kind of courtroom, and he just delivered a winning testimony. But things didn't go the way they planned. The officer beside me asked if I had the security footage ready, and I handed him my phone. On it was clear video of Karen's son walking into my yard uninvited, shouting and trying to inspect the lock before I'd even spoken a word to him. The second clip showed the previous day, where he simply walked past the house and nothing happened at all. No words, no interaction, just him and his phone, acting normal. The officer nodded, passed the phone to his partner, and then both turned to the HOA rep, asking if he'd like to see the footage as well. The smug look on Karen's son's face drained in seconds. The HOA guy watched the videos in silence. After a few beats, he looked up, confused. "This doesn't match the complaint," he said flatly. Karen jumped in, saying the footage must have been edited and that there were other witnesses. But Lisa, and now 2 other neighbors, stepped up and backed my story. One even said she'd been asked by Karen earlier that week to sign a statement she hadn't even read, just to support a neighborhood concern. That's when the twist hit. The officer got another radio call apparently. Karen's son had another complaint open against a different neighbor from last month, also involving false accusations. That case had been quietly dismissed, but it raised enough red flags that the